In the very beginning of when you are learning, it's so exciting because you're finally, I felt like I was having this vocabulary to name things that I had seen my entire life. And it has a name and it has a concept and it has tips of how to navigate this. I started feeling like, okay, I know so much. And then the more that I learned, I feel like I actually realized I know so little.
Let's link up with Krista on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Hello, FYX listeners, and welcome back to our latest episode of the FYX podcast. I'm your host, Krista Huber, and if you tune into our last episode, we have spent a lot of time over the course of this year really diving into this idea of our relationships, the quality of our relationships. Not too long ago, I did an episode around communication and what can make you a better listener and how to ask better questions, and really just having a better understanding of what it takes to improve our relationship with ourselves and in turn improve our relationship with everything in the world around us. So we are doubling down on that theme this week and now bringing it into the context of couples and romantic relationships. We do touch on professional relationships inside of this episode, but I am really excited to present today the co-founder of a very interesting platform for virtual therapy specific for couples called Ours. And that co-founder who joined me, as you'll hear, is Jessica Holton. And Jessica is just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to understanding the research behind types of communication, how couples, through her own experience with her now husband, how couples can really just have better interactions and think about things from a place of how can we enhance our strengths in our relationships versus approach something like therapy at a point when something might be going wrong or isn't good or getting to a point of where you feel like it can't be fixed. Although, as you'll hear, she believes that nothing truly gets to the point of where it truly just cannot be fixed. So her experience is fascinating in that she went on this journey herself of wanting to just continue to enhance her relationship and was met with an experience in trying to find a couples therapist to work with, that there was stigma around it. It was kind of a process to go through to find the right fit for a therapist, calling as many of them as you could to be able to get set up with one. And I've had that experience myself too. So like a true founder and entrepreneur and somebody who self-identifies as a builder, she took this interaction that she was having and said, how can we make this better? In comes what today is Ours. And inside of this episode, we talk about what Ours does in terms of taking this approach to therapy that isn't solely about the interaction between the therapist and the couple that he or she is working with, but other things that they do to support couples to actually do the work involved in having and pouring into their relationships outside of the actual therapy session, which I just love. And I think there's such a parallel to that inside of how we think about nutrition coaching with the Fitness Fix, because the work that we do with our clients, yes, we're interacting on Zoom. Yes, we are having conversations. We're submitting check-ins to kind of give updates on the week. But the real work that we're doing is in those real life situations of, hey, I'm going out to eat. How do I navigate this? Hey, I'm traveling. I still want to prioritize my fitness. Still want to maintain as much of my routine as I can. How can I actually navigate that? That's the real life scenario, because you're spending more time in the world with yourself, navigating those situations. And you want to walk away from a coaching experience, or in this case, a therapy experience, knowing that you are getting those tools and able to actually practice them and feel like they're really tangible, because that's what you're going to carry with you through the rest of your life. That's where the real lasting change comes in. So I'm very excited about this episode. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. Can't wait to hear the feedback on it. And if you happen to have any interest in checking out ours for yourself, or maybe referring another couple in your life who might find this useful, definitely head to the show notes, check out their website, learn a little bit more about what they offer and what they do. There are even free resources available as well. So with that, let's welcome Jessica Holton to the FYX podcast. Jessica, welcome to the FYX podcast. I'm so excited for this conversation. I am very passionate about relationships and relationship health, especially how it plays into our physical fitness and wellness. So I think the FYX listeners are in for a real treat with you. And I will let you share your story and how you arrived at the work that you do. But to kind of kick things off and keep it light and fun, whenever I have a guest on the show, I'm a big coffee drinker. So I got to know what your go-to coffee order is.
Well, Krista, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and so looking forward to this conversation. When it comes to coffee, I'm actually very simple. I just do regular coffee with no milk usually. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of whole milk if I'm on my I need some more fat to kind of counteract the acidity of the coffee kick. But I usually just do some black coffee, and I try to do kind of watery coffee so that I can drink a lot of it throughout the day without getting super jittery.
You know what? That's actually really smart. Trick your brain into having a bigger cup, right?
Exactly. This morning I actually did half decaf, half regular in my pot of coffee. So
okay. Nice.
See how that impacts me.
Well, most of the time, as you could guess, the nature of the guests that I have on the show, everybody's pretty much a black coffee drinker. Once in a while, I love, shout out to Chobani. They have the best coffee creamers. So if you're ever thinking about spicing it up, highly recommend checking them out. They're really good. Really good. Yeah. Their cookie dough is my
amazing.
Favorite. Yeah. It's a little treat. In the morning. Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome.
Well, we're going to go right in. And we're going to take this in a totally different direction. But before you kind of give us your background, and you have a really interesting career path too. So I'm sure that's something that we can kind of dive into. Like you, I started off in finance and never expected to necessarily have a fitness business that was more than a side hustle for me. So I'm sure there's a lot we can relate on that. And a lot of the people who listen to this show, a lot of the clients that I work with are career corporate women. And I think that there'd be a lot of value in you getting into a little bit about what that experience was like in finance and since making the transition, with ours. But instead of kind of giving us the typical resume and telling me exactly how you got to the seat that you're in right now, what I really want to know is who Jessica is at her core. If you were going to introduce yourself to somebody and have that deeper conversation, rather than telling them this is who I am and this is what I do, I want to know who you are and why we should care about what you have to say today.
I love that question. Thank you for asking it. I would say three things. One, I am a builder of things that matter to people, and I'll share more about that. Two, I'm an adventurer. I love travel. I love seeing new places. I love imagining that new places could be my home one day. And three, I really love relationships and understanding what makes them work and investing in our relationships. And on the first point, a builder of something that matters, I think that my mission in life and what fulfills me the most is building things that matter kindly. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of been a theme of mine throughout my career, but also throughout my life. I've always just thought that building organizations, businesses, clubs, groups, gatherings could always have such a larger impact on the world than just my own individual reach could ever have. And I love working with people to do that. And I love doing it in a kind, good, solid way.
I love that. And I want to pick up with what you said about the relationship piece from loving relationships. And what I think is really interesting about your story, and of course you can weave in ours in kind of getting into this next part of the conversation, but I was listening to another interview you did, and I know that you and your now husband, right? Have you guys officially gotten
Yep.
married? Congratulations.
Yep. Exactly 2
Boyfriend.
months ago, actually.
Oh, congrats. Boyfriend at the
Thank
time. But what I
you.
really love about your story, and we have to start here and highlight this, is you sought out couples therapy when everything in your relationship was great. That
Yep.
I don't think is relatable for 99.99% of people. And that then influenced why you created this company now today. So I think that'd be a great place for us to just begin, because I'm now seeing a shift today, and I'm sure you would agree with this with the work that you do. I think there are more people that are spending more time investing, even if it's not in the relationship that they're in, at least in the relationship with themselves, which ideally will make for better relationships personally and professionally. That I am hopeful it will only become increasingly common that people have therapy and have this type of coaching and support when things are quote unquote good, versus waiting to the point of it being bad, however you might define that. So kind of walk us back like through your thought process of what made you go to your boyfriend and say, hey, like this is something I think we should explore.
Yeah. Well, Krista, it was part of a larger overall health and wellness journey that I was on. So this was several years ago, and I had this moment of realizing that a lot of people, and it was actually came out of a study that I had read that Harvard did,
Mm-hmm.
and their TLDR was actually that it's not our cholesterol, it's not how we take care of our heart, it's not the exercise that we do that is the number one factor behind how we age. It's our relationships and the quality of our closest relationships.
I believe it.
And yeah, and I was reading that in conjunction with a study that had been done on people who were on their deathbeds and what did they regret the most. And I had this moment, and this was probably 6 or 7 years ago, that I was like, I'm still young. I'm still in this moment of my life where it can be anything. And I want to take this time to invest, learn about my body, learn about my mind, learn about my soul, and figure out truly what's going to work for me for the rest of my life to be healthy, feel good, and be in control of how I age to the extent possible. Of course, there's always things that come up.
Yeah.
And so I was trying a bunch of different fitness classes. I fell in love with yoga and running, and I was learning how to meditate. I was trying out coaching and individual therapy, and even things like doing all the annual physicals that you're supposed to do and
That
taking
we
care of.
tend to skip when life gets in the way, and we should.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy to skip when
Yeah.
there's nothing immediately wrong.
Yeah.
And I was so kind of like surrounded by the daily impact that intentionality had on my life. And I was trying to figure out like, what are the high leverage ways that I could even more improve my life? And the biggest thing was very obviously was my relationships, and actually not even just with my romantic relationships, but my friendships, my family relationships, and my colleagues as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I come from a family that has seen what it looks like to get divorced and to head that way for several years. And I didn't want to repeat that. And it's not even divorce that I didn't want to repeat. I didn't want to repeat the dynamics of getting to a point in a relationship where it's almost like too far gone. I don't really believe that it's ever too far gone, but I didn't want to wake up one day and realize for the last 10 years, he hasn't been happy, or I haven't been happy, or we just haven't been kind to each other. And I think life is too short to go through life not getting the most out of our relationships, because they're the most beautiful, fulfilling thing that we can have in this human world. And so that's really what spurred this journey. I said to him, he was my boyfriend, and I said, would you be open to going to couples therapy with me and just see what a therapist says about our relationship and kind of set us up on a path to be a strong couple? And we don't know what we don't know. We wanted someone to look at our relationship and say, hey, you guys are doing great at these 10 things, keep doing them, and that's what makes your relationship you. But here are some watch outs. No relationship is ever perfect. Here are some risk factors that I see, and here's how we can work through them. And of course, also at the time, our relationship wasn't perfect. There was nothing immediately like wrong with it, but we, like in any couple, we had lots of friction from, here and there on various topics. And so that's what led us to look into couples therapy. And thankfully, he was super open to it. There was not a stigma within our relationship, but a lot of stigma associated with going to couples therapy when we talk to friends and family about it, and even with therapists themselves. So we started, or I found a co-founder about 4 years ago. We started ours, and we've never looked back since. And it's been a fascinating journey. So I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah, I definitely want us to talk through more about actually creating the company and talk about like the merging of the technology piece, but actually therapy as well, because I think there's a lot that we can unpack with just the nature of, I think most of it we can stem back to the pandemic and that being like a transition in virtual therapy, some of which hasn't always been for the better. I can tell you from my own personal experience in working with therapists virtually and in person, depending on personality, sometimes it was hard, sometimes it was really great and very accessible. But what I want to go back to, just to touch on a few of the things you said, because there is a lot in there, is the idea around like knowing, hey, we're really good in these areas, we're not the best in others. I'm curious if there's anything that like in you guys going through that experience together that you maybe intuitively knew was something you could work on, but you weren't actually practicing it. And then how that evolved, like once you actually started putting those tools to work. Because I asked this question from my own personal experience of I was engaged, almost got married, realized it wasn't the right person, and nothing happened poorly between us. And we both walked away from it just knowing that we weren't the right people for each other. But a lot of it came down to not having the best communication skills around and being clear on what we wanted for our lives and what we saw for our futures and our values. And some things were assumed that should have just actually been conversations. And I was 25. I didn't have the words for it at the time that I know I do now, but I've acquired those words and ways to communicate by doing that work myself and now feel confident that I can bring that to my future relationship. But I'm wondering for you, knowing that you had already started on this path by yourself, like once you actually got to the point of the two of you doing this together, what did that start to look like in your day to day and how your relationship evolved from there?
It was really fascinating. Heading into it, we had a sense for, I think intuitively, but had never said out loud, that one thing that we are super aligned on is finances and money. And
which is huge.
It's huge. It's one of the four main causes of divorce, not seeing eye to eye or not being aligned in finances. And intentionally looking at our relationship helped us actually verbalize that and even like double down on that strength of ours.
That's cool.
Which is really cool. It's like, it's not just like going to therapy is not just about fixing what's wrong or, training the weaknesses.
Right.
It's
like let's enhance
riding your strengths.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then the two areas that we started working on were, one was intentionally reflecting on our relationship. So we now do what we call meeting of the minds.
Cool.
And other people call it like State of the Union meetings, but we do it, we try to do it once a month. And it's basically like a Monday evening that we sit down, we both contribute to the agenda, and we take a pulse on kind of all the like areas of our life. So our finances, our household, our long-term goals, our short-term goals, social, anyway, all of these various facets of our relationship. We just take a pulse on how are they going for both of us at this moment. And then we have discussion topics of like some things like just logistics, like we have these 3 weddings coming up. We need to plan travel. Who's going to take point on what we need to plan and do for it, so that we're communicating about that before it becomes a last minute thing. But we also talk about kind of like our long-term goals, whether it's buying a house or eventually having kids, or just generally like how we're feeling in the relationship. So that practice has been so tremendously helpful. From a logistics standpoint, it's like removed the possibility for us to say something like, well, I thought you were going to do it. And I thought, or like, I don't like the way you did this. And, it has removed that mental load of like logistics in our life together. And it has also helped us have practice in talking about our relationship. There are 5 levels of conversation that any two people can have together. And I'm sure you and some folks know about it. But level 1 is like very ritualistic conversation. It's like, hi, how are you? And then it goes all the way through. Level 4 is about your feelings. And so it's like me saying, Krista, how are you feeling about recording this podcast today? And you're sharing how you're feeling. And that's pretty vulnerable and open. And then level 5 is your feelings about us and our relationship. And so that's like me saying to you, like, Krista, how strong do you feel our relationship is today? What do you like about our relationship? What's not going well? And that's a super vulnerable thing to talk about and takes a lot of practice to be able to get there. And so having this meeting of the minds has given us the communication to be able to reflect on our relationship and start to learn vocabulary that helps us identify not only for ourselves what we're feeling, but also share with the other person how things are going. And that has been tremendously helpful for our communication. And then the second area that, so while we're very strong in finances, we are not as strong in how we divide up household chores.
Okay.
And we just have very different viewpoints on like what is important when it comes to the household. And so what we uncovered and over the years has been very helpful is that the fights that we would have about household chores were really fights about other things. Like it was more fights about when you don't do this, it makes me feel like you don't care about me. It's never really about.
And it probably reminded you of something like from your childhood or his.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we have, I would say the fights have not been eliminated, but we better understand each other when it comes to those things.
Yeah, I love that. And I'd love to hear, I'm assuming at the time that you guys started this, were you still working in private equity or had you begun to make a transition into entrepreneurship? So
I was running a nonprofit at the time. I co-founded another organization that is more about expanding access into careers in finance.
Oh, cool.
So nothing about wellness or, I mean, there's an element of wellness, I suppose, in there, but nothing about like health and wellness and therapy. And so it was during that time that we were starting to look into couples therapy.
Okay. But you had become a founder of a company, and I'm sure you can still pull up a number of examples of in your investment banking and private equity days where you take on these leadership positions, and that requires a certain level of self-awareness that can come along with a lot of what you're talking about. What I'm curious to know is how you found that that work you were doing in couples therapy might have also impacted your ability to work with and collaborate employees that you had at the nonprofit, or, organizations you were working with to try to grow it. Like, what did that look like for you on the professional side of things?
I mean, it changed everything. So I would say this was also in conjunction with, I took a class in business school called colloquially touchy-feely. The class is actually listed as interpersonal dynamics, but touchy-feely is where I started to kind of learn all of these various like dynamics and research-backed things that happen in relationships. And the class was, I believe, 12 or 13 of us sitting in a circle and literally just sharing what impact what each person has said or done has had on me, so that you start to understand how you show up in that relationship, the impact that it has on that person and the relationship, in short. And so that was kind of the beginning of me being really just interested in the science behind all of this. And I share that because what we did in that class, I think, kind of started the intentionality of the impact that being aware of what you say and do and the actions that you take and the impact it has on others really matter. And that was, of course, in a business school perspective, presumably, looking at how we will eventually impact our colleagues.
Sure.
But it really was very translatable into personal life as well. And so I think all of these experiences have shaped the way I show up, or I try to show up in all of my relationships. For example, when my co-founder and we also have a monthly review meeting where we kind of share similar type of questions and answers, and we both always have to answer. And one of those questions is, what have I done that has bothered you in the last month? And that is a really important question to us. Yeah, and it's a good one because it helps us avoid building resentment and forces us to say, something that's on our minds that bothered us. Sometimes we don't have anything. We're generally get along very well. But I think kind of building in the same things that work for me in my romantic relationship into other close relationships has been very helpful. And I would say with the team and being in an organization, I think sharing your intentions, sharing, how sure you are about the path that we're going down, and kind of being stepping into that vulnerability at the right time. It's not always always have to be vulnerable to be effective at this. But I think I've learned a lot about how my words and actions impact others. And I think that has helped a lot in the business setting. I would also say I have a very long way to go, as do we all.
Yes, because I actually, the timing of us having this recording actually worked out so great, because just this week we'll have a little break in between because of the 4th of July holiday, but the episode that's out right before yours is actually me working with my transformation coach and us talking through the skills that I've acquired in having coaching with him. And we were talking about this idea of doing the work, and that concept is never done. It doesn't end. Yep. Right. Yep. And it's really developing the self-awareness piece. That's something to continue to pour into and have practices and routines around, what you're talking about with having these monthly meetings and everything. But what I also want to ask you to that end too is, in saying, hey, I know I have a long way to go. What has it been like for you if you've encountered maybe a situation where you can see the other people involved don't have this level of self-awareness, and how do you think about the best way for you to relate to them? Because I think sometimes that can be a challenge too. It's I think people, I forget the term for it, but it's this idea that as you can go more into this concept of enlightenment, the ego comes in and thinking that you're a little bit better than that person, right? Because you have poured into this effort and part of your journey to try to better understand people. So there's a responsibility in that of saying, okay, not everybody is as open to some of these concepts as I am. And I have to kind of consider that when I interact with them too.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually kind of think that the more, at least from my experience, the more experience I've had with these kind of learning emotional and relational, whether it's techniques or concepts or research, dynamics, I'll say two things. One is, the more I've learned about it, the more I feel it kind of takes this curve of when you first start to dip your toes in the water of learning, what a bid is in relationships, or crossing the net in relationships, and you're not supposed to do that. In the very beginning of when you are learning, this is so exciting because you're finally, I felt like I was having this vocabulary to name things that I had seen my entire life, and it has a name and it has a concept and it has tips of how to navigate this. I started feeling okay, I know so much. And then the more that I learned, I feel like I actually realize I know so little.
Yes.
So I think at this point, I kind of feel like, I think adopting a beginner's mindset always, for relationships, but also just in life,
Mhm.
in everything has, and it's, again, it's not easy. It's not like I'm always abiding by this, but if I could give myself advice, it would be to adopt a beginner's mindset and know that, yes, maybe I know some concepts, but those are those are on paper and in
Right.
books, and it's not in real life. So every single interaction that I have, even with my husband, who I've been with for almost exactly 10 years, um, I every interaction that we have is a new one. So it's, you know, I always have to learn how to adapt what I know to what is going on for both of us today. And we're different
Mhm.
people than we will be tomorrow, than in 5 years. So it's always a new thing. And I think reminding myself of that is important. And then the second thing is, really trying to just, something I try to do, is see it from the other person's point of view and not without judgment, and
Yep.
saying, okay, if I'm taking my ego or my particular reaction, out of this, how is this other person viewing what I did? Knowing everything that, our relationship, our history, all of that, what would they think if I'm just totally stripping myself out of it? What could they be thinking and feeling? And trying to have empathy for understanding that. And also looking at myself and my words and my actions more objectively,
Mhm.
and trying to understand where that's coming from for me. Like if I'm yelling at my husband, or yelling in a fight with anyone, that yelling aspect is probably not coming from like our relationship itself. It might be because I've had a really bad day,
Right.
or I had too much coffee,
Yeah.
um, and so really just trying to be objective and curious, I would say, is, I think, important no matter where in that journey of knowledge and expertise you're on.
And I also think, just to speak to what I've learned through that too, in being more objective about things and trying to see it potentially from that other person's perspective, it's actually helped me spend less energy feeling anxious about something or like overthinking it, because it's like, okay, let that person have their own experience too, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love
I
that.
can't I can't
Um,
claim that I came up with that. I'll give it credit to Oliver, who I was just mentioning is the coach that I
oh,
work with.
nice.
And that was something he said to me, like, what would it take for you to just like allow these people, even clients too, and working and with people on their nutrition as well, it can be that challenge of like, you, especially being empathetic about it, like you want to help this person, it's possible for them, the change that could be possible for them in their life, but sometimes it actually takes like letting them have their own experience of going through something, knowing that you're there to support them, for them to come back to you and say, hey, let's try, like, let's try to do this a little bit of a different way. And I found as a coach over time, it's come down to me asking different types of questions, more questions in general, and practicing more listening to be able to like really hear what is bothering the person, and even just saying like, why, and almost being
Yep.
like that annoying 2-year-old who's like, why, because really the other person may have trouble articulating like why they have this certain relationship with food, or their stress response has them make certain decisions around their meals that like they objectively know is not going to get them to where they want to go. But stepping in as a coach and just offering them this solution of like, well, this is what you should just do instead, that doesn't actually help somebody like go do the other thing. We have to like really
Right.
get to the root of why they're doing that thing in the first place. So it's been really great, like in my own personal life, but I've seen that professionally just in those interactions too. And I love that you've been able to kind of say the same. So transitioning a little bit into talking more about ours itself and how you have begun to grow the company and even your vision for where you guys want it to go. I would love for you to touch on the experience that you initially had, because from what I understand, I think it sounds like just like the barrier of actually trying to find a therapist has informed a lot of the work that you now do today. So walk us through what that was like for you and your husband to try to figure out, okay, like, where do we start? Where do we go? Because as I was hearing you say this in another podcast, I thought to myself, anybody I've worked with in some sort of therapeutic setting or some kind of coach or mentor in that way, I always got as a referral. And those were better relationships than the ones that I found just like Googling on the internet.
Definitely. Definitely. First of all, I love the why, and the fact that you get down to that, like that emotional, real need or reasoning. I think that is so powerful. Our experience was, so it was before the pandemic, and he was working, I was working. So the first thing that we did was Google couples therapist near me. And because we didn't know anyone in couples therapy. The people that we knew who had gone to couples therapy were much older. They were married, they or divorced. And it was like, we didn't want our mother's couples therapist. It was kind of like what we were, I don't know, that's how we were thinking about it. But so we Googled, and I believe that we went to like ZocDoc, Yelp, and Psychology Today. And I was the one taking point on finding the therapist who we would work with. And it was ridiculously overwhelming. I mean, there are thousands of therapists in New York.
Yeah.
So many. And I felt this added pressure of, I have to like them, of course, and I have to get along with them. They, of course, have to get along with me. But I'm also kind of making this decision on behalf of my husband too, or my boyfriend at the time.
Yeah.
So there was like kind of that dynamic of like, how do I weigh what I need, what he needs, what we need? And like, what filters am I supposed to apply for that? So it was just like logistically really hard. So I ended up reaching out to about 20 therapists. I had it in a spreadsheet of who I had reached out to, where I found them, and a little bit of why I chose them. Okay. And I called them, I emailed them, and I got voicemails back. I didn't hear back from some of them. A lot of them weren't taking on new clients. And so we started talking to friends, to your point on getting a referral. And that's when friends were like, you're going to couples therapy? What happened? And that's where that feeling, that moment, it was logistically difficult, but that felt overcomable. There were so many people who we could try working with.
Right.
It was really the what's wrong that got me feeling like, first, ashamed, and then second, protective of all the millions of couples who want to try couples therapy and then are put off by it for some way, or feeling shame associated with seeking out support. And that's what really sparked me to want to build exactly what I would have wanted, which was a brand that feels good to be a part of, and one that I can kind of like, if someone belongs to Equinox, it's like, Equinox is a great brand. And like, I get it. Like, I get that you're investing in your health and your physical. And I wanted to be able to go to a brand that was like, okay, that's really cool that you're a part of ours. And just made it really easy to find the right therapist. And then ideally that was built for people like me and my husband, in that, again, our relationship wasn't perfect, but like nothing was pressing yet, or at the time. Because when we did meet with therapists, they would say, like, the first question was, what's the problem? What are we solving here today? And we really wanted like a deep dive into our relationship, and then kind of be guided along the way to do the work. And it was hard to find someone who would do that for us. So, or with us. And so that's what we built ours to be. And ours has, of course, had lots of twists and turns in terms of what it offers. But yeah, it came out of us finding it very difficult to find a therapist who fit what we were looking for.
I think before we even talk about like the shame piece and just like the stigma around it, there's a lot of value in acknowledging that when people are busy and they're working, and then you potentially throw children into the mix, whatever other stressors you may have in your life, the aspect of, oh, I need to go make this many phone calls will totally deter somebody from doing something like that. We were joking about it at the beginning and saying like not going to doctor's appointments. Half the time it's just because you're like, my day got away from me and I didn't make this phone call and now this doctor's office is not open. Like it's like become such a joke, but it's really true. And yet this is a really important thing that could totally change your life, right? And I remember the first time I ever went to a therapist, I was living in Charlotte at the time. And I actually felt really lucky. Like, I don't know what it was about this therapist, like her bio, like something about it. I was just like, oh, like this seems like a person I would feel comfortable talking to. But the reason why I'll say I felt lucky was because she actually told me to go interview a few therapists before I committed to working with her. And I thought that was interesting because like she was almost talking herself out of the job, right? But she said to me, she was like, this is really important for you to make sure that you're going to connect. And like, even if you definitely connect with me, there could be somebody else down the street who you connect with even better. So I want you to go ahead and do that. But even then, I didn't come up with this like exhaustive. Yeah, I know. It was awesome. And I didn't come up with this like exhaustive list either. I just maybe talked to like 2 more people. And then as soon as I had met her, this was pre-pandemic, so it was in person. I was like, okay, this is a really good fit and this is great. And when I think back though, at the time I was really questioning where I was in my career. And eventually that actually led me to realize that I wasn't in the relationship that I wanted to be in. And what I wish I had done differently with her was stayed in it as I started to question some of these other things that were happening. But what you just mentioned about like coming to this to solve a problem, what I had initially presented to her was like not feeling like I was moving in the direction I wanted to professionally. And eventually like my problem that we solved was actually quitting that job. But what came after was like really where I could have utilized her support more. And I'm wondering how you think about this inside of ours and having the virtual aspect of it too, like how you guys think about sessions, because when I just go back and think through like the way it was structured, it was just like there was a certain number of sessions that I was almost buying like a package. And that kind of also had something to do with it too. So knowing that you have like this opportunity, right, to have virtual support, like what does that look like inside of ours? And I also would love for you to touch on, from what I understand, there's some other kind of like self-guided work that you can also do inside of the program. And that sounds really, really cool, because what I think is very tricky about therapy is somebody can go into therapy and say all of the things that they think they should say. And I don't want to call anybody a liar, but like, I'm kind of saying that a little bit. And you could walk out of there and not do the exercises and not work with the tools. And I found that ultimately what's worked best for me was having the support of somebody who, with the coach I work with now, we use the tools inside of the session, and that's the entire session. So it's just been a very different experience. So
great.
It's amazing. And like these are just 2 of the things that I've noticed from going through it, of what worked and what didn't. And I'm curious now, as you've grown this business and work with more people, like what are some of those problems, let's call them, or like barriers inside of the concept of therapy that you feel like ours really looks at in a different way?
Yeah. Well, you just gave me an idea around, I mean, not an idea, you said it's what you do, but like using the tools in a session is so powerful, because it kind of like connects what happens outside of that session, because our life is mostly happens outside of a session. Right.
Yeah. It really reinforces, like, I have it sitting next to me right now, but like I keep my journal like during the session, and we end our sessions writing down intentions for the next week or 2, depending on when the next session is. But it's just, it's a small thing. But even like I've started to get into meditating, and I used to be the person who was like, I could never sit still for 5 minutes. So I thought it was totally unapproachable. Meditating with somebody yesterday, did it for almost 2 hours. And so now I feel way more comfortable to actually do those things on my own. And I don't know that from the past interactions I've had with some type of support like this, that for me just happened to be like the missing link to get me to then go do it in my routine, because not doing it in your routine it's like brushing your teeth, right? So if you don't do that piece of it, it's never going to stick.
Yep. And I think in areas like therapy or coaching, we're working with someone to get their guidance and for them to show us how to incorporate these tools and skills that we learn. So it makes a lot of sense to start and hone that with them and then be able to bring that outside of the session. And really that's where you're utilizing that the most.
Right.
So we have so couples on ours work with a licensed trained therapist who has specific experience in couples.
Okay.
And we generally have couples who are either engaged to be married and are doing premarital counseling with ours. Their goals tend to be, we want to talk about all the big stuff that we should talk about. A lot of like should.
Yeah. Things I wish I had at the time that I went through that. Yeah. So totally get it. Yeah.
Exactly. And same. Before getting married. And then we have other couples who are either dating or married, and they're either making a big decision or they're struggling through a fight that they can't resolve. Or they most often say, our communication, we want to improve our communication, which often ends up kind of coming in a lot of different flavors. And so half of their experience is working with the therapist in sessions. And then the other part of the experience on ours is tapping into all of the asynchronous digital self-serve product and content that we have. And there are three main flavors of those. One is we have what we call deep dives, and deep dives are for couples. It basically is like a session, but without your therapist present, so that it's really about you and putting you in this.
Yeah.
And so these deep dives are a combination of education, like you'll learn about what making a bid looks like. You'll also learn, if you're doing a finances one, how couples like you tend to split their money, their bank accounts and all of that. Then the deep dive goes through exercises for you to do together and kind of put it into practice or see what surfaces, and then have conversations about it. So couples are reflecting separately, they're journaling on their own, and then having conversations. And then that's all led, the couples led through the deep dives. A second tool that we have are card decks. So couples can do card decks on their own, even before signing up to do therapy with ours. So anyone can check it out. And then their therapist, once in therapy, their therapist can assign card decks to them. So if in the session, let's say, something with in-law dynamics comes up, they can assign a specific card deck that they have in mind. And that card deck is really a discussion to be had. And our couples
just kind of makes it fun. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like nice and easy to use, surfaces good questions. And couples will do it like on hikes or in the car, like on a road trip. And of course, like over dinner too, but they're meant to be like intimate conversations to surface these things. And then the third is what we call a rosebud thorn. And it's a check-in that couples do regularly to check in on what's going well in our relationship, what's not going well in our relationship, and what are we looking forward to, or what do we want to work on growing. And that's really helpful in like surfacing kind of topic areas. Actually, they're all helpful in surfacing topic areas to then bring to the therapist in the next session and say, this came up, like we kind of got stuck here. How would you think about this? Or how can we dive into this with you? And so it really is about joining what happens in a session to the rest of our life, what happens outside of the session. And these are also tools that can be used after graduating from therapy, and kind of going into what we call maintenance mode.
I love that, because I think that kind of gets at my point of where I felt a little bit like, if I could change one thing about like that first therapy experience I had, it would have been having like a better compass on continuing. Yep. And I just didn't know what was going to happen next in my life. And it's not that I couldn't have gone back to her, but it then became like the logistics of the pandemic. I moved, she was in a different state than me, so she couldn't actually support me because I was in New Jersey and her licensing didn't like cross that way. So it really, I learned a lot of what I did not know went into therapy. But with you and your co-founder in some of those different modalities that you were describing, how much of that was informed by your own experiences of what you maybe felt like was missing in therapy, market research that you were doing? Like, how did you land on those other tools to be incorporated?
So we in short really listen to our customers, and listen to our couples quite a bit. And we're in a lot of ways designing for ourselves. So my co-founder, before we met, he was working on a company that created digital social tools for couples to work on their relationship proactively. So you can see how,
okay.
We
So
met
synergistic. Yeah.
made a lot of sense. And he had a lot of great insights around what couples will do as a habit. And, we had this design principle of, we don't want this to be a daily thing. We want to have less frequent touch points that have higher impact overall on your relationship. And so we've always had, our guiding principle has always been help couples invest in their relationship. And so we've gone through a few different iterations, and the way that we decided how to do them was really like, we still have tons of ideas. And we'd kind of choose one that we had the most, a strongest hypothesis around.
Okay.
And then put it out there and then iterate on it until it really was working for couples. So our earliest iteration of a product was what we called the marriage retreat, which was really, really fun. And I'm so nostalgic for it because it was 5 sessions and 10 couples would get on Zoom. It was like the height of early pandemic. So we weren't fatigued by Zoom yet. And it was like 10 couples, and every session was a different topic. And it was for both premarital couples and couples who just got married. And the workshop would be led by an expert in that space. So we did sex and intimacy, finances, values, our future, and communication. And the workshop would be led by an expert in that, and they would guide couples through having conversations, doing exercises, basically what ends up being our deep dives. And it was so fun and so transformative for us, and also for me and my husband, but also for all the couples who were on it. But we found that the hardest part that to get couples to buy into was the group aspect and like the scheduling live aspect. Even though couples would end up saying their favorite part was like meeting other couples doing the exact same thing. Yeah. It still just had this kind of like, there was a hesitation around joining other couples who don't know yet on Zoom to do this. And so we shifted that aspect and we made it 1-on-2 with a coach or a therapist and a couple. And that's like how we've made every shift into what we are today, which is therapy and coaching on a platform with digital tools. But we've really tried to listen to our couple and make decisions based on what is most impactful for their relationship.
Because we talked about referrals, right? How do most of your couples find you? Is that what it is, or what has really grown that aspect of it?
It's a great question. I would say both referrals and Google. So couples who are Googling for a couples therapist, and then couples who hear about us from friends or from podcasts like this, and like the New York Times, kind of just like hearing about us in various ways, but nothing wild there. Really, just we're trying to get the word out there as much as we can and be there when couples are searching for what we offer.
I'm curious if there's anything that goes into messaging, branding, marketing, or just how you kind of think through this. But I think unfortunately, because of like some comments you made around like Zoom fatigue and things like that, technology is awesome in that it has allowed people more access to services like these. And I also think at more accessible price points too. which can of course be helpful, but sometimes I hear the negative side of that in terms of quality, right, with what you're getting. And I've talked to therapists before who have even referred me clients because the person may need support on the food side of things. And the person has said to them, oh, like I've tried other online therapy, and I'm not going to like throw any brands under the bus or anything like that. But how do you think about the way you market this company, especially because you had referenced this at the very beginning when I asked you who you are around like kindness and those sorts of things too. So I'd imagine that's like a big part of your values in the company's mission statement.
Yeah. So right now we are cash pay only. And couples, meaning that we're not covered by insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And insurance with couples therapy is very complicated. It's like kind of possible, but kind of not. And the healthcare space, I think, is slow to recognize the very real impact that our relationship has on our physical outcomes and, of course, our mental.
Which would then make things, it's all correlated that when we're looking at insurance premiums, you think it would make sense. Yeah.
I mean, there's like literal research that says someone who has been diagnosed with cancer, if they have a strong support system of strong relationships, their chances for going into remission and healing
are higher.
Like
I would believe that. And I would also think, just like the inverse of things in here, not obviously we're focusing on the positive, but like talking about divorce rate and things like that too, is just like, there is a reason why people say the person that you marry is the biggest decision you will have in your life. Like even from a business perspective too, I think about this a lot as a founder. Like there are just certain things now that I actually am glad that I have grown my business at a point of being solo, because I have more clarity around being able to verbalize the type of support that I would be looking for in a partner to understand what it is that my life actually looks like. Cause it's not the same as somebody who may have a more quote unquote traditional job. It's just different. Right.
Totally. So, no, I know one of my mentors in finance, she told me the biggest career decision that you'll ever make. And I was kind of like on the edge of my seat thinking she was going to say like, is what title you'll get or like how you negotiate your salary, whatever. And she was like, is the partner that you choose. And I was like blown away by that because of course that makes sense, but it really is like your partner's the one you come home to and tell about your day and troubleshoot all the problems that are going on at work. And they're the ones who are, hopefully cheerleading for you. And if you have friction and you have stress at home with your partner, that
can affect your work,
influences how you show up to work.
Of course.
So they really are related. And I believe that with food and with money and with physical activity, it's all connected. But yeah, so as it relates to, how we position ours, we have made the very conscious decision that we hand match all of our couples to therapists or coaches. And we on our team, we know every single therapist who's on the platform, and we've interviewed them, we've onboarded them, and we know what their style is, what their areas of expertise are. And then we do the same thing with couples. We do a matching session with couples. So our care team gets on a Zoom and meets the couple, gets to understand what they're looking for in terms of style and what they're coming to ours for, so that our care team can then say, okay, knowing everything we know about you, here are 3 therapists who we think would be a great fit. So we take that mental load of going through thousands of profiles, and show them, 2 or 3 that we think would be a good fit. And we've been very intentional about who is recruited onto our platform from a therapist perspective. So we are working with therapists who have specific experience in couples, are mission aligned in terms of proactive relationship health is a good thing and a valid reason to come to therapy, and are committed to delivering high quality care. And that commitment to high quality, I think, sets us apart, because when you join ours, you know that sometimes it's not always a 100% perfect fit with the
Sure.
therapist, but you know that you'll get matched with someone who has really great experience. And if it's not a good fit, we help you find
The next.
someone who is. And so that our whole goal is to make it feel like a very high quality, seamless, easy experience that is both fulfilling and just navigable, easy to navigate for our couples. And then in terms of price point, yeah, as I mentioned, we're cash pay right now and hoping that insurance kind of takes foot a little bit. We do help with reimbursement and getting super bills and do everything that we can to make the end price point lower to our couple. But that's also where a lot of our digital tools come into play. So couples can continue to invest in their relationship, or even before they are an ours customer, invest in their relationship in a way that is completely free or low cost.
That's awesome. Now, do you anticipate always being focused on couples, or do you guys see a vision for, having therapy options for individuals?
Definitely therapy options for individuals. We've actually started piloting that with some folks. Our focus still is on relationships, though. Mm-hmm. So we're still working with individuals who either just broke up with their partner or went through a breakup, or are even trying to figure out who to date and kind of going through like the dating
I wanted to
journey.
Ask you about that. So I'm glad you brought that up, but keep going.
So we're starting that and remaining in our mission to help people have better relationships and therefore better lives. And then the other thing that we're in the future really excited about is helping individuals with all of their close relationships. So I dream of a day where I can go to ours with my mom and with my sister and with my best friend, and strengthen all of my relationships that are important to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to go to the dating piece because clearly there's so much that has gone into building this vision and this brand around what you said with like the research you were reading too. Yep. So just as somebody who's like in it to the degree that you are, I just need to know like what's your hot take on dating apps and how they may be both, we'll say positively and negatively, impacting just like dating culture today.
Yeah. So I would be curious.
Whole podcast. I know.
Yeah, I'd be curious to get your thoughts too.
Oh yeah.
So I think I'll share one positive and one not positive. Okay. I think on the positive side, from what I see, it helps us be more intentional about who we are dating. And I think it helps us explore more and open us up to people who we never would have met otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so I think it opens up this, imagining yourself with this person who you never would have crossed paths with, and realizing and being open to maybe this is something that I want that I never would have considered otherwise. So I think that's a positive. I think the downside is because there are so many people accessible to us. It feels very much like, if the first date was, we didn't have a chemistry, like instantly move on, cut our losses. And I don't think that's like necessarily a bad thing, but I think where I see it being a bad thing is when we have so many kind of like filters and criteria for a human who we want to spend our life with or a meaningful part of our life with. It's really hard, like on paper versus our relationship is just very different. And right. I think there are absolutely core values that need to be aligned and lifestyle and like generally be aligned in many different ways. But what I worry about is like the person who you're dating is not a piece of paper. It's like, we're going to have a relationship and no matter what, we're not going to find someone who's like the exact version of what we're looking for. And so I think like it might be reducing our society's ability to make a relationship work that could work if we put that time and energy in, to understanding another human being and investing what needs to be invested to make that work.
Um,
But, you know,
yeah.
then I'm like, you know, life is short. Like, why invest in a relationship that isn't going to be,
True.
you know, isn't going to work? So I think there's a spectrum, and I think
Yeah.
those are like the considerations.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm with you there. I was going to say there's a spectrum, because the whole idea of like, you think back to like dating, and I think about this often, because just the timing of when I was in a relationship that I thought would be my marriage, and then like going back into dating, it was in a season where dating apps just exploded in terms of like use. So I was never really on them in the first place. And a lot of people in my life, like, they don't understand them and they're not on them. So I'll tell people stories and they're like, what? And I think part of it is just like the communication piece of being online. Like, this could even be social media, like with, you know, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Like, this doesn't have to be specific to dating apps, but the way that people conduct themselves with the things they do or do not say, I think a lot of that is because they're hiding behind a screen.
Yep.
I also think there is can be a lot of miscommunication around like intentions. And I think that goes with this whole idea of how to be a better communicator of, you know, it's on both sides. Like, and it doesn't matter male or female in any kind of way. Like, I get frustrated because I think like there's too much on social media that's like throwing people under the bus. But
Yeah.
then there's also not enough of saying, hey, wait a minute, like, this person who may be upset that this didn't turn into a relationship, it's not because the individual on the other side that they were trying to date wasn't honest. It was because this person might not have been honest with themselves. Like, so often I talk to friends who are like, seeing somebody and they're really excited about it. And then the person straight up says to them, I am not looking for a relationship. And they're invested, and then they try to force it. And then when they get upset, I find that I'm like the person who's like, but they told you that. Like,
Yep.
they told you that they weren't looking for this, right? So that's where the whole hookup culture comes in too. And I think that just adds a lot of complication to it. But at the same time, you are correct in that it does give you this opportunity. When you think back to like dating years ago, people had this mentality of, oh, I met this person in a bar. They seem like they could be pretty compatible with me. I have no idea if I could meet another person like this, because the world just doesn't feel as big as it now is today.
Yep. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. So that's where I think it actually is very powerful, because it gives you this chance to meet someone. But the risk in that, and just from my own experience, is like, if you have no connection to them at all, like you don't know other people who know them or things like that, I've found myself in situations that ultimately, as I learn more about the person, like I actually felt really unsafe. So that piece, I think, is like, you could say, like, sometimes I feel now that like I have to go do all this research on this person. And I don't want to do all this research on this person, because I'd like to just get to know them. And even on my side, like with the work that I do and how I use Instagram for my business, like I am very open about things. And sometimes I even wonder if somebody were to go listen to my podcast before going on a date with me, I actually don't want that, because I want them to just like experience me in front of them for the first time. But it's like, you can't, like, I can't control that, right?
Yeah.
Like, they could go research whatever they want.
Yep. Of course. But it's hard. I don't know. It's hard to, you like both want to make sure that the person is, you know, you're going to jive with them. Like, why go to a bar or a restaurant or coffee or wherever if you just know immediately it's just not going to work, you know?
Yeah.
And you want the experience of starting a relationship with someone, and that means learning about each other and, you know, building that relationship together. And, it's been very interesting to watch. It's also been really cool, I think, to see like how there are various dating apps that are coming up that are trying to be more,
Yes.
you know, like more like who the person is focused. And but then on the flip side, I think we're about to see, if we haven't already, a lot of AI driven dating apps, which honestly like could be really interesting. Like, but like a very dystopian version of that is like, you know, a Jessica, I don't know, like avatar, dating like a Krista avatar,
Right.
until like we get to the point like our avatars are like, yeah, it's good to go, then meet in person. Like, I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know. It'll be interesting to
it is
see.
really wild to think about. I don't know if you're familiar with Young Pueblo. Like he does tons of relationship work, so I'm sure you've come across his stuff. But I know he's creating a dating app, and I'm very
Oh, I
curious.
think I heard about that.
Yeah, it's called Ready, and
Yes.
I'm really curious to see what the experience will be like, because it is so rooted in his work is so rooted in self-awareness, meditation, getting through friction in relationships. Like, how is that going to manifest inside of a dating app? Because the construct that we all think about is just like swiping, right? So like what kinds of questions will be included? Like I think that'll be really cool.
I think so too. I think the hard thing is, from a business perspective, if you're raising venture capital, like the app or the business just has to grow quickly,
Mm-hmm.
or have really solid unit economics. And with like the supply and demand of a dating app, it's a hard business to run.
I would
Uh,
imagine. Yeah. And I'm
yeah.
actually curious. I did want to touch on this too before we run out of time, in just thinking about your experience in finance and that first half of your career. How has that kind of informed like the business side of ours, like looking at it from the perspective of raising capital and that sort of thing? Like, I would imagine you just having that experience of being in private equity and looking at what brands, what the KPIs were and what you really needed to be able to get that kind of support. Like how has that kind of informed maybe features or decisions that you have made with your team?
I think the biggest way it helped, and this is the reason I always say to people who ask if, should I go into banking or consulting right after college or start something? I generally say I have no regrets whatsoever about starting my career in finance, because it let me speak the language of business. And I know how the three statements interact with each other, and I know what revenue means and variable costs and fixed costs,
Mm-hmm.
and what profitability means, and how reinvesting capital could either grow the business or not create a return. And so I think from my perspective, it helped me just understand what a solid business looks like. And as simple as it sounds, what margins are.
Yeah,
Like what, of course I would love to charge way less money for therapy. But there are costs associated with delivering therapy. And we also want to pay our therapists very, very well. And so I think just like really understanding like revenue and costs, and seeing many different types of companies. I was investing in consumer retail, so I was seeing a lot of like skincare brands and physical retail stores too. And so I kind of was able to see a lot of different business models and their pros and cons. And so I think it influenced me, I think in two ways, one business and one like just less tangible way. One way is just like understanding what makes a good business, like the fundamentals of a business, and speak to investors using the same language, like being able to know how to model out what's going to happen, even though our models are much less detailed than what we looked at
sure.
in banking. But then the second way is like, I think, uh, knowing how to work really hard. Like in banking and private equity, the hours were long. I think they still are in that world.
Yeah.
And we had a lot to do. And like I had to figure out ways to be efficient, and we all did. And I think like knowing how to work hard and where it matters was important. Having like, I mean, we would always joke, but like in banking, if the slide number was like a little bit aligned the wrong way, we had to fix it before we could send it to print. And having that like attention to detail and extraordinarily high standards for quality, I think then influenced what I hold myself accountable to. And in, the way that we build, we don't do crazy hours like we did in banking or PE, but I think like having a commitment to high quality standards
Yeah. And
also
you know
came
that
from
you
that.
could do it if you needed to.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
think that's something that is you won't get the appreciation for that until you go through it. I don't know if you follow Cody Sanchez, but I love her content. And she put up a really good post the other day that was just like, for all the people who tell you and people who are ahead in their careers, for them to say like, oh, like you will find ways to work smarter and more efficiently. She basically was making the point that will not be possible for you until you work extremely hard for a very long time, because you just
It's
won't
so
see
true.
how to do it. And I was like,
Yep.
I read it and I was like, that makes me feel a lot better, because that is somewhat the disconnect sometimes that I have with like friends who do have the 9 to 5, where like there's things that just I think about at night that they don't, right? Or I'm okay with working like more odd hours, so to speak. So,
Yep. Totally
yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not give it back, but I'm not sure I would do it again right now.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. I know exactly what you mean. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. I've seriously enjoyed chatting with you, and I'm excited to
Thank you, Krista.
continue to follow along with everything that ours is doing, and watch it grow and be able to support that. So I appreciate you for sharing everything today and talking about your own life experiences that have influenced all of this. Before I let you go, I like to do a fun little like lightning round with lighter questions to end the episode, and then we will be done. You ready? Okay.
Ready.
If you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what is it?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, I'm gonna do a cop out. Okay,
Cool.
can I say two?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Pasta, because I just love pasta and it
Good
can be
one.
prepared in so many ways. And reminds me of my family. And two, my cop out is veggie bowls because I actually put meat in them too, but it's just whatever is like in my fridge
Yeah,
that I
love it.
love making
That's pretty
it.
much like all of my meals. So I'm with
Yeah,
you there.
exactly.
Yeah. Just throw a bunch of stuff in a bowl and eat it. That's the
Yeah.
best way to cook. Yep. What is your preferred style of workout? Like, what does your training routine look like? Because we didn't talk about physical fitness.
That's true. I really love yoga and I really love walks.
Nice. Are you a podcast listener? Like, do you spend a lot of time listening to podcasts or not really?
You know, I used to because I used to be like on the go much more, like,
Yeah,
going on the subway
sure.
or in a car. And I'm less so now.
Okay. So during that season,
But
let's say, like, what were some of your
yeah,
go-tos to listen to?
I really love how I built this.
I was hoping you were going to say that.
I really love it. Like
Did you
I
read the
love
book?
initial stories. No, I did not. Oh,
You
I
have
remember that
to.
was
You have to read
okay.
the book. It's so good because the way that the book is organized, they group, like Guy Raz is just such a great communicator, and I love listening to him to hear the way he interviews. The amount of prep that goes into his podcast, like with his team, is pretty unbelievable. Like they spend, I think, a minimum of like 2 months preparing for the actual interview. The amount that he knows on
Wow.
the person before he interviews them is impressive, and you can hear it in the way he asks his questions. But the book is really cool because he groups together these founders in a way that's like they're not even in the same industry, but they may have gone through the same challenges. And so you feel like you're reading this story that's like hundreds of stories. Like it's not like a book where it's just like this chapter talks about Sarah Blakely and then the next one talks about the founder of Lululemon, right? Like it's really awesome. So highly recommend it. It's just a different experience. Like even if you've listened to so many of his podcasts, you'll pick up on totally different things from actually reading it.
That's really cool. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about it.
Yeah, totally. Highly recommend. On the book note, do you have any favorite books?
So I really love like Jodi Picoult
Nice.
and those kind of like kind of crime stories. I loved Sapiens. I actually did not get to the end of it, but loved most of it. And yeah, I think those kind of two categories.
Cool. And our very last question, if somebody could only take away one thing from your conversation with us today, like just to kind of summarize it, or one thing you want to leave them with, what would that be?
relationships are meant to be enjoyed, and to invest where you invest is what grows. And so investing in our relationship really does pay off for our whole entire lives.
Beautiful. So well said. Well, thank you again. Absolutely loved this. I'm excited to hear everybody's feedback on this episode. And before we let you go, where can everybody stay connected with you, with ours, if they want to pursue possible couples therapy? We'll put all of it down in the show notes. So give us your shameless plug.
Amazing. Withrs.com is where you can get started. And our Instagram and TikTok are Ours Wellness. And we'd love to see everyone there. And I'm on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Jessica. And to everybody who tuned in today, we appreciate you guys. Remember, the way to get the message out on great topics like this is to actually share the show. And maybe if you are somebody in your life and you want to explore couples therapy and you're not exactly sure how to bring it up or navigate that conversation, this is a good way to do it. Just be like, hey, I listened to this podcast. What do you think about it? And let that open the door for the conversation. So appreciate everybody for tuning in today. And from wherever you're listening from, as always, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.